conquista tutto. L'amore conquista tutto.
All right. Hey there. Welcome to episode 47 of the Unfiltered and Undiscovered podcast. And as promised last week, we've got Braggy back. But I might have told you last week that Braggy was going to be in a cave churning through some songs and writing songs and with a whole group of people. But as it turned out, Braggy, what happened?
Well, I was with a group of people for a little while, figuring songs out. And then I was supposed to fly to Sydney to meet up with my brother to run over songs for an album we're going to make in July, up your way, Tony, in the beautiful Queensland. And on the day I was supposed to fly out, I started to feel a bit sick. So I thought, maybe I shouldn't go. So we managed to score some of these rat tests and, I had COVID. So I couldn't go.
In the COVID cave.
So I've been in isolation. So and thank you for all your tips, Tony, for the songs I should write. But I think isolation is going to be one of them. I've already started on that. So any more lyrics you can send me would be great.
Yeah. So if anyone's got any inspirational song titles for someone that had 7 days or whatever in isolation.
The 27th I get out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's 14 days where you are.
Yeah. So 27th I get out.
And now Yvette's
Yvette's got
positive.
Yep.
So how does that all work now? Are you in?
No, it's not. It's
separate
10
rooms?
days, Tony. I think it's 10 days. Yeah.
Okay.
So I got it last Thursday.
Yeah. Big shout out to Browsy as well. Big
Poor
Stu.
Browsy.
Browsy had it as well. He got COVID. So
Browsy.
Yeah. And then the other thing is Nikki and Dolph. We did the quiz night. Nikki did. They've got it. Mm-hmm. So Sharon and I are feeling a little bit left out because everyone's getting COVID and we're not. But
don't worry.
I'm not necessarily in a hurry to get it if I haven't already got it.
Mate,
so
it wasn't too bad. Just a couple of days felt a bit crook. I'm fine.
So tell us a little bit about this album that you're putting together with your brother and your associated.
Well, I've always wanted to do an album with my brother, and it's never happened. My brother's worked his ass off over the years, and he taught me how to play guitar, but he never got to do that. Never got to be in bands and have all the fun that I've had.
Yeah.
But he showed me music for the first time. He bought me my first guitar.
Wow.
So I owe him a fair bit. And all the stuff that he listened to back in the day, which is like swamp stuff. Because we're born up in Townsville, which is, to me, like the south of America, because we haven't got no alligators, but we've got crocs, We've got a few, dodgy politicians like they have there. And there's swamps, there's mangroves. So we decided that we're going to play some swampy sort of stuff. The name of the band's called Rail Motor.
Okay.
Did you ever live in Townsville when there was a rail motor, Tony?
Yep, the old rail motor. What was it, Ayr to Townsville?
I think in the old days it went to Ingham, it went to Ayr, Home Hill, and it went out to Charters Towers. It definitely went out to Mingler because I caught it once to go to the Mingler Rodeo.
And Rail Motor is also the first song on your album for the Blow Up season.
Yeah, that is. So these songs are very swampy, and there's some funny lyrics in them. It's going to be a heap of fun. And we're going to go up to a little place called Agnes Water near the town of 1770. If anyone knows, it's a beautiful spot. Yeah. We're going to go record it up there.
And hopefully we can get up there and do a live podcast episode.
That would just be...
That would just be awesome.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be good to give the viewers a little insight into what it's like? I mean, we're not the greatest band to be filmed recording, but, people will get the vibe.
Absolutely. Now, last week I mentioned to the listeners about a band in Maryborough called Ruination.
Yes.
They were due to come on next week, but Luke's contacted me during the week and just let us know that their EP's going to come out. So he sent us the demos that we've been listening to.
Okay.
And it's a little bit of grunge, heavy, alternative sort of stuff. So with you going the swampy, it might be a bit of inspiration as well.
I love the grunge, mate.
But we're going to push Ruination back to the EP launch so that it sort of
and when's that?
Coincides. February, I think.
Okay.
February. I mentioned Alison Asarch last week. Got a new album coming out. It's called Texas to Tennessee. Comes out February 11. So
American.
Yeah, it is.
I love it.
Yeah, I love the title, Texas to Tennessee, coming out February 11. And next week we've got another Adelaide musician, Dave.
And who's this? We're allowed to say, or is it a secret?
To be honest, it's a lady called Amanda Smith. She's a female vocalist, and she's got she's got 2 songs,
okay.
and they're to do with bullying, and they're to do with mental health. So she's got a really good, strong message. So she reached out and she said, "Hey, I want to be on the podcast." And I said, "Hey, that's absolutely
love songs
wonderful.
with a message."
Yeah,
love songs with a message.
And we haven't had an Adelaide musician outside of yourself. So I was Sam, but
yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, but someone outside of our extended family. So it's good that we've been able to do that. So if anyone else knows any musos that want to just come on, or record stores, or music stores, or long-term retail assistants in music stores,
Anybody's got anything to do with music.
Yep, absolutely. Let's get them on the podcast. So I'm going to hand over to you because I'm going to be driving this thing from a production point of view, but you've got put together tonight's show. So give us a bit of an overview of what we're doing.
Well, we had the gap, where we didn't have anything, and you said, what should we do? And I've been in lockdown, bored shitless, so I was just like, fuck yeah. Tony, let me do this. It gives me something to do. So I just thought, I don't know, hopefully people will find it interesting. I thought I'd pick 5 albums out of my collection, 5 vinyl albums. I've actually got them here, even though we're going to do a little PowerPoint thing tonight. I've actually got the albums here, so they're
awesome.
Actually real.
Yeah, look at that.
Look at that.
Jeez,
One.
they're golden oldies, aren't they? Look at
They
that.
are. They're all kind of a bit old, but I mean, I'm old, so that's what I go for. And I thought it'd be interesting just to tell little stories about how the albums were recorded or how they came about, and just I don't know, because there's lots of interesting stories, especially the last one, which there's a bit of a surprise with.
I'm looking forward to this. So listeners and viewers, please bear with me. I've got a little bit of juggling to do on the media board. So this is where we're going to kick off. And it's...
Okay, we stop there. We'll just do one at a time, give me a chance. So the first album, you may look at it and you think, well, that's Led Zeppelin 1, yeah? Do you know this album, Tony?
No, I don't.
You don't? You never listen to much? You're not a Zepp fan?
No,
it's not your thing.
Outside of... what
Stairway to Heaven
about. I never really dived into Zepp.
Okay, well, this album was recorded in 1968, so I really want to focus on the date for this album. So 1968, that's when the Beatles have done the White Album. So they're singing songs like Desmond takes a barrow to the marketplace. You know that song? So you imagine that's the sort of stuff that's going on around that time, Jimi Hendrix is out, so it's not... He's only just kind of starting, really. So there's nothing really heavy. And then these guys in 1968 just blow the lid off everything because it's the first real heavy album.
Yeah.
And you've got John Paul Jones, John Bonham, Robert Plant, and Jimmy Page, 4 awesome musos. So think about that. So, but you might see on this that it's a little bit different. The writing on the top of that is in Skrillex. It's the Russian. I can't remember what it's called. And so it's actually a Russian bootleg, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this came apart. So if you want to go to the next thing, please, Maestro.
Yeah.
I need to give you a signal. Is it going to go? Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
You can't read the writing very well. I wonder if that's going to be...
No, it's it'll probably come up all right.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. So you've got to think about this. I want to talk about the Cold War because this album is from... It's a bootleg from Russia. And so if you think about when World War II finished and the Eastern Bloc countries started to come about, you think about being in those countries, Tony, like Czechoslovakia, Romania, all those countries there. The wall goes up in 1961, and 1961 is the same time that the Beatles are just getting started. They're playing in Hamburg, right? So these people are missing out on that because they don't want any of that Western culture to be heard there. So unless you can go underground to hear it, you're not going to hear that, right? And this goes on for 20 years. So they miss the Beatles, really. They don't get to see them, even if you're born around that time. You don't get to see them. I wouldn't think you'd get to hear them much because, there was no records. They would screen everything that went in there. So you get to 68 when the Soviets invade Czechoslovakia and they block off that. It's another part of the Eastern Bloc. And the Beatles are virtually finished by then. That's when this album that I'm going to talk about comes out. So you missed that. 1980, the Cold War's still kind of going. We boycott the Moscow Olympics. So then we're into AC/DC territory there with Back and
Johnson.
No, you don't get to hear that. All the way through to Kylie Minogue before the wall comes down.
Wow.
So, but there was still music going on in there, but it was all underground and it was all dodgy. I mean, most of the music that was in there good work, Tony. I love you. Most of the music that was going on was underground, and anything that was not underground had to be sung about. Like if you're in North Korea, it had to be sung about how good the Soviet and the Communist Party was, But there were guys and people, obviously, who loved rock and roll and could get hold of it somehow and hear it and loved it, and so much that they were willing to risk, going to jail for it. And this guy is a legend, Andre Tropillo. He starts out in the 70s, and he works for the University of Leningrad. I think he's in the geophysics department or something, and he manages to hire a room from the university, and he gets hold of this recording equipment that they would have had for something else, and he starts like a little recording studio. This is in the early 70s. And then he starts promoting. He starts getting bands because there's rock bands, but they're just under things. So he starts organising these rock concerts. But the rock concerts are in houses or in back street, like garages and places like that. And most of them are only acoustic, because as soon as you amplify it, if someone hears, they tell the freaking Russian police, and you're gone. But they say, from what I've read, that some of these concerts were amazing because there were so many people would be packed in tightly, and they reckon the atmosphere was unbelievable. So, after this, he gets a job working for the House of Pioneers, or the Young Pioneers, which is like the Russian equivalent of the Scouts movement, right?
Okay, yeah.
Except they probably got real guns, and shit like that. But what he does with them, he starts teaching all these young kids how to play guitar and how to record music. And so he's doing the revolution, underground. And there's more bands. He has more bands happening. And then finally, when Mikhail Gorbachev comes along and promotes glasnost, which means openness, and the wall comes down and things start to free up a bit, he goes to St. Petersburg and he sets up kind of a proper studio. And he starts copying or just re-recording, actually copying onto vinyl classic rock albums, and you can see him up here. But to avoid copyright, he changes the names of them. And he actually called it, he was against copyright, he preferred copy left.
Yeah, okay.
That's what he said. He said, piracy, it shouldn't be illegal, especially in Russia, because piracy gave us our freedom. That was one of the things he said.
It's a good way to think about it, to be honest, yeah.
You see, they did the Beatles one there. They actually did Sgt. Pepper's, and he would change even the covers. So, like, on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, if you know, it's all the pictures of all these people they liked, and Karl Marx was one of them. He cut Karl Marx's head off and pasted on this friend of theirs who was the biggest Beatles fan that they knew in Leningrad and put his face on. So if you can find that album, it's worth a quid. So the album I have is the Led Zeppelin one, and the most amazing thing about it.
Gotcha.
The most amazing thing about it, Tony, this is not like 1991. This was done. Is that, and I can't work out for the life of me why this is this. I've looked on the internet. I can't. It's actually printed on a submarine map. It's like flimsy, kind of like paper. It's map paper. And I've actually showed it to some people who are kind of a little bit nautical, and they go, "Oh yeah, that's definitely a Navy map." So, how's that for interesting?
That's incredibly interesting.
And I thought what we'd do was we'd play, Tony. Or I'm going away from the mic again.
Yeah.
I thought what we'd do is we'd play first track. So you could imagine 1968. You're listening to the Beatles, them, and those sort of things. And then this band comes out, and this is the first freaking song, first track of their first album. And it kicks. Listen to the kick drum kind of.
No matter how I try, find my way through the same old jam. Good times, bad times, you know I've had my share. When my woman left home for a blind man, but I still don't seem to care. 17, I fell in love with a girl as sweet as could be. It only took a couple of days for she was rid of me. She swore that she would be all mine, love me till the end. But when I whispered in her ear, I lost another friend. Oh, good times, bad times, you know I've had my share. When my woman left home for a blind man, but I still don't seem to care. You know I've had my share. When my woman left home for a blind man, but I still don't seem to care. I know what it means to be alone. I sure do wish I was at home. I don't care what the neighbors say.
So much to like about that.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, the vocals have always stood out with Zepp, but then on that particular one, as you were saying, the drum, and the bass.
Yeah.
Sort of, so.
Yeah, all great musicians. And John Bonham, like, it's weird. It's his first album he plays on, and he's fully formed. He's already the best drummer in the world. You know? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
not that one. One before.
And I find it interesting that they would have been really just focused around no music, and then all of a sudden that becomes... So that was a total bootleg. So Led Zepp made no money out of that album that you got,
No,
I take it.
no money out of that. I don't know if they make money out of it now. I don't know how that's worked since then, but No, so he just had copies and he just copied them, and then to get around the copyright, like I said, he just changed the names because they'd only just opened up, you know. They'd only just ventured dipped their toe into capitalism. They didn't know what was going on.
But even so, being one of those bands, I mean, you know, whether it's the Beatles or Pink Floyd or Led Zepp, I mean, what an honour. Ultimately,
Oh, you'd think so, hey?
What an absolute honour having your music bootlegged, and that was going to be the first foray into rock and roll in the country.
Yeah, and people probably doing covers of their stuff, risking their lives playing your music because they love it so much. The power of music, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. So what's this one about?
This is a band called Klaatu. What a name.
Klaatu.
Yep. And the name of the album is, even though it's not on the album cover, is 3:47 Eastern Standard Time. Right? Okay. So now these guys are... This is right up your alley, I reckon, Tony. These guys are from Canada. And they started around 73, and this album came out in 77. I think they had...
Yeah.
I don't know if they did an album before this. I'm not sure. They had, I think, some singles. So they're from Canada. And they're just nerds, these guys, right? And they're right into prog rock, but they're also really into the Beatles' latest stuff, like the Sgt. Pepper stuff with all the brass and all the string. You know how that music, all that really pompous. I mean, I love that, but that sort of style stuff. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see these three guys. Can we do that?
Yep. So there they are. The prog rock nerds.
The prog rock nerds. Look at them. I think they're a bit older there because I think no one knew of them back then.
Yeah.
And so they released this album, and the reason... The way they get their name, this is how nerdy they are, the way they get their name is from a movie. And if you show the next slide, you'll see. It's from a movie called The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yeah.
It's a 1951 sci-fi movie. You know, remember those old early sci-fi movies, right? And the guy comes out and the spaceship lands on Earth. It's like a Close Encounters. The spaceship lands on Earth at guess what time, Tony?
3:47 Eastern Standard Time.
And the guy who comes out of the spaceship, he's like the ambassador for the aliens. His name is Klaatu. So that's how they call their band, Klaatu. So they released this album, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't get much of a response, even though I think there's some good songs on there. And there actually is a couple of good songs on there. There's nothing. Right, and now you got to remember this time. This is late 70s, but the Beatles have broken up in 1970, 71, and they're all doing their solo things. And everybody on the planet wants the Beatles to get back together, but they just no, they're not doing it. They get offered millions to go and play gigs to come back together and play a gig, but they refuse. Everyone wants to hear them again. But they can hear how McCartney's playing, and they can hear how Lennon does, and they can hear how Ringo plays. So when you listen to this album, it sounds very much like the Beatles. Even the guy singing sounds like Paul McCartney in this track I'm about to play you. And so in 1977, this guy in America listens to the album more deeply and writes an article and says, I think this album... Because the other thing about the album, Tony, is that... I could show you here, is that there's no... On the back of it, there's no credits. And even on the record itself, it just says all songs by Klaatu. It doesn't say who plays on it. It doesn't say any bios. Doesn't say anything about producers or anything. It's just got the names of the songs, and they're all written by Klaatu. So it's very mysterious. No one knew who it was, right? And one of the things that led even more, there you can see it. One of the things that led even more to the rumor was that Ringo fucking brings out an album in 1974, and he's got this fucking Klaatu character. He's dressed up as him. If you could, okay, I think I got a picture of that.
So, is there like this conspiracy thing that
it starts getting more and more and more. So 1974, Ringo brings this out. Look, it's the same dude. He's coming out of the same thing. So everyone starts to believe this guy's article, saying, "Fuck, this is probably the Beatles," because that's why. And it turned out that Capitol Records was actually the Beatles publishing thing in America as well. So that added to it. And the Capitol, they would put out these little things about Klaatu, but they would never say who they are. So they knew that this was going to help sell albums.
Yeah.
And it did. So they ended up having a top 40 hit with a song called Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft, which the Carpenters recorded.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. So that song's on this album. So I just love the fact that, yeah, they just because of one article, they made a lot more money. So I'm going to pick a song, and this one sounds the most Beatles if you listen to it. But it's pretty long, so you might want to play it all.
Yeah. So this is Sub Rosa Subway?
Sub Rosa Subway by Klaatu.
Back in 1870,
McCartney?
just beneath the Great White Way, Alfred Beach worked secretly, risking all to write a dream. This wind machine, this wind machine. New York City and the morning sun were awoken by the strangest sound. Reportedly as far as Washington, the tremor shook the earth as our feet. Through underground, through underground, deep through underground. On our board, Sub Rosa Subway. And you wonder who's been digging underground. It's out there. It's out there. It's out there. We're out. Oh no, we're out. As for America.
So, Tave,
Yeah.
what brought you to that album?
I read it because I'm a Beatles nut.
Yeah.
It just came up once when I was reading some article about, I think I was reading about, you know how there was a rumour once that Paul McCartney had died?
Yeah.
And if you look on some of the albums, they said there was all these hints about why, you know, like he's like Abbey Road, he's walking across dressed in a suit like he's the guy being buried. Lennon's dressed as the, you know, there was all these crazy
Yeah,
rumours that
yeah.
McCartney had died. I think I was reading something about that, and then they mentioned this other crazy theory that they recorded an album in secret. And so I would look for that album for ages, and I finally found it.
Excellent.
Just cool to have. I don't really listen to it much.
Yeah. but still,
Interplanetary Craft is a good song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got a story to it, and you
Yeah,
know,
well, that's
when
what
we can share that story. I think it's awesome.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I thought. Okay. We're moving on to one of my favourite albums. I love this album so much. The reason I came upon this album, I should tell you this story now. When Vet and I had just been married, and I was working at a music shop, a lot of times I would take in like these musos who'd been kicked out of home for one reason or another, young guys. And I say, oh, they got nowhere to stay. They're sleeping in their car. So I'm like, oh, it's all right. Come and stay with us. And this was one young kid who I think his dad had caught him growing dope in the backyard and kicked him out. And so, we said, oh, come on. He was a really good drummer, this young kid. And he only lived with us for a few months, I think 2 or 3 months. But he said, oh, Dave, he's much younger than me. He said, Dave, do you know Van Morrison? I said, oh, yeah. And I'm rattling off, the Van Morrison, It's Brown Eyed Girl, Moon Dance, all those other ones, He said, have you ever listened to the album Astral Weeks? And I said, oh, I don't think so. He said, oh, man, it's an amazing album. So he actually left this album with us.
Oh, wow.
When he left, and he wrote a little note on it saying thanks for looking after me and stuff. So it was really cool. So I'm going to tell you the story because it's an amazing album, this album. And the way you've got to look at this album, Tony, is like the way the Impressionists painted. They painted really quickly and they tried to capture the light and they tried to capture the moment like a camera shot, and just get that feeling. And this is what he's tried to do with this album, is capture a moment in time. So Van Morrison, he was in the band who sang Gloria, in Ireland, and they followed the British invasion with the Beatles and the Kinks and all. And they went to America. They didn't do that well. They had a big fight. They went back to Belfast. They split up. The guy that was in charge of their record company, he was in New York. Van Morrison went back to New York and made an album with that same record guy. And on that album, you can see he was Brown Eyed Girl, and there was, I think, another minor hit. Anyway, it's 68, 67, so the hippie things start, and everyone's trying weird shit, and Van Morrison wanted to do that, but his manager wasn't into that, and his manager also happened to be involved in the underworld in New York City, right? And so they had artistic differences, and so he wanted Morrison to make more poppy stuff. He didn't want to do that. They argued. One day, this guy has a heart attack and dies, and his wife takes over the company, the record company, and she blames Morrison for causing this guy's heart attack, right?
Oh, wow.
Saying that it's all the stress you've put him under.
Yeah.
Right? And so he doesn't know what to do. She says that you've still got to fulfill your contract and make another album. He doesn't want to do that. He tries to play gigs around New York, but because this guy and his wife are involved in the underworld, no one will book, no one wants to touch him. I think Neil Diamond was with the same guy and had the same problems. And so things go on for a bit, and then eventually she finds out that the contract that he signed, there's a loophole where he hasn't signed his immigration papers properly, and she can deport him. So she tells the authorities that he's a legal immigrant. This is Van Morrison. He's going to be deported. So what does he do? He marries his girlfriend like that.
Yeah.
And he's safe. And they move to Massachusetts, get out of New York because the shit's going down there. And he starts playing acoustic stuff because, Bob Dylan's doing the acoustic thing. And it's Peter, Paul and Mary. He thinks, I'm going to do that sort of stuff. And he hooks up with this bass player from a music college and another guy who's another college, music student who plays sax. And they start doing these gigs around Massachusetts and gets a little bit of a following. And these guys from RCA, I think it's RCA, there's the three guys playing in these little clubs. These guys from RCA come and said, we should go and check out that Van Morrison. He's signed to that company, but maybe we can, because that song Brown Eyed Girl was good. So they go down and he's not playing anything like that poppy stuff. He's playing stuff that's a little bit, more creative and a little bit more out there. But they still sign him and they negotiate their way out of the contract. And the way they do it is that he still has to write so many hours worth of songs. So he writes 36 nonsense songs and he puts them all on one album. and that's how they gets out of the contract.
Oh, wow.
I know, right? Back in the day. Anyway, they said, okay, well, you can make an album. And they weren't really happy with the direction he was going. They wanted him to do pop as well. But, it's a bigger company. Just see what happens. Because in them days, everyone was experimenting.
Yeah.
You know, let's give it a go. You never know what happens. And so the guy he gets to produce realizes he's a little bit into jazz. So he hires these 4 amazing jazz musicians, right?
Yeah.
If you go to the next slide. And these guys have played with like jazz legends like Charlie Mingus and all these guys are right up there in the jazz field. There's a bass player, a guitar player, a percussion player, and a drummer. So the poor old bass player that he had, virtually he's just out of a job, right? And they record this album, Tony, in 3 days, in 3 sessions, right? The whole album. And Morrison doesn't talk about it much, but I've read comments from these musos, and the bass player mainly, he was like leading the session. He said that Morrison would walk in to the studio. He wouldn't even say hello to him. He'd go straight into the vocal booth with his guitar, and he'd play once through the song so the guys knew how it went, and then he'd say, ready to go, and they'd say, what do you want us to play? And he said, just play what you feel. So this album is virtually, and I don't know how many of the tracks, but there's a few of the tracks of one take, like first go, make it up as you go along, and the musos only having heard him play through the song once with his acoustic guitar.
Wow.
And he's also improvising with the singing as well.
Yeah.
And the words are beautiful. There was one quote from someone who said, and the album didn't do really well at the start, but since then it's like, I think Rolling Stone magazine have it in their top 50 albums of all time because of the fact of how quickly it was made and what they captured when they did it. So when you listen to this, imagine that I think I picked Madame George. It's a bit too long to play the whole thing, but he starts out in the acoustic, and these guys are listening, and they just come in, and they're making it up as they go along.
Excellent.
How about that?
That's a great story.
Down Cypress Avenue, with a childlike vision sleeping into view. The clicking, clacking of the high-heeled shoe. Ford and Fitzroy, Madame George. Marching with the soldier boy behind. He's much older now, with hat on, drinking wine. And that smell of sweet perfume comes drifting through. The cool night air like Shalimar. And outside they're making all the stops. Kids out in the street collecting bottle tops. Gone for cigarettes and matches in the shops. Happy taking Madame Joy. Oh, that's when you fall. Whoa, 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 whoa. That's when you fall. Yeah, that's when you fall. When you fall into a trance, sitting on a sofa playing games of chance, with your folded arms and history books you glance into the eyes of Madame George. And you think you found the bag. You came weak out.
So while I'm listening to that, I'm just sort of thinking about that whole process there that they've put that together. It's just phenomenal.
So, I mean, it is brilliant. But if you think the song's 3 chords, okay, so it's 3 things, and these guys being jazz guys, They'll know, okay, it's G, A, and D. They know that before the start because he's played it through once. Just keep going the same all the way through the song. So they already know what notes they can play and what notes they can't play. You know, so they've just then got to choose what they play, what notes they play, how they play it, soft or loud, what phrases they use to fit. So I guess they're listening to him singing the song and just playing what they feel.
And even that vocal bit where one, like...
He could sing the phone book, the guy.
Yeah.
And the song is actually about a drag queen who lived back in Dublin when he was a young fella that everybody on the street knew, you know.
Yeah.
And the guys would go around because she had the best drugs or something, you know, so they'd all hang with her, Madam George. And it just, to me, that just paints such a picture in your head. If you close your eyes and listen to that, you can, you know. Yeah. It's a good Sunday sesh song for me, maybe not for you.
Yeah, it would be...
Put it on, listen to it in the background,
and
you'll pick it up as you go along, you know. It's cool.
It's background, but it's also something you'd like to just dive into, like just with nothing, immerse yourself in. I think so. Just those little runs that you've got. I mean, was there violin in that?
Yeah, there's violin.
Yeah. So just sort of ticking them off as they go. So yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, it is. Okay, we're going for time, all right?
Yeah, I haven't been keeping track.
Good.
So
That's good. Do you know this band, Tony, called The Band?
I've yes.
You heard of them?
Yes.
Well, I think their biggest hit was "Take Your Load Off, Annie." Take your load for free. That was on their first album. I absolutely love this album, and I love this band. And I think there's only two guys left alive now. The guy on the far right, Robbie Robertson, who wrote most of the songs, and the guy with the big beard, Garth.
Yeah.
So these guys, they started out... well, there was a guy, if you go to the next page, there was a guy called Ronnie Hawkins. And Ronnie Hawkins in America, back in the late 50s, was like an Elvis copy, right? Because everyone copied Elvis. And he was from Canada, but he'd do this big tour, go right down to the south of America and right back up again and just play show after show after show. He did it for years. And what he'd do was he had a band, right? And then in those days, you'd go and play at a venue and you'd have a support, have be a couple of bands on. And if there was someone in the support band that was better, like a better guitarist than anyone in his band, he'd get the guy up to play like a duel, like they'd both play. And if the guy in the other band was better, he'd just tell the other guy, sorry, mate, you're not in the band anymore. I'm taking this guy. And so he built this unbelievable band for the day.
Yeah.
And you can imagine what it would be like in the late 50s, early 60s in a frickin' driving up and down America, Route 66 and all those places, and going to Canada and then going back down south and all those. And they would get ripped off. They would get in fights and, and they'd have to play long hours. So they just got so good. And like I said, once again, he wouldn't let their musicianship drop, because if someone wasn't playing well, he'd just replace them.
Wow.
So in the end, they got a bit sick of him, because he was also like a churchy guy. He didn't want them to, and we're getting into the 60s, the guys are smoking dope. He didn't want them to smoke or drink too much. And they were young boys, they were partying. So eventually they left him, and the drummer, Levon Helm, became the leader of the band, and they called him Levon and the Hawks, I think, or something like that. Anyway, after Ronnie Hawkins had left. And if you go to the next one, they gigged everywhere, and then they finally moved to New York. They met Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan at that time was just going electric. He stopped playing the acoustic guitar, and he was just turned. He was going to play electric guitar, and all the folk guys hated that. And so he realised that when he went on tour, he was going to get a lot of shit. People were going to boo him and stuff. So he said, I need a band who's tough on the road. And there they were, right? So he got Levon and the Hawks to be his backing band, and they went and played. Didn't turn out that well. I mean, they went to Europe and everywhere, but they just got booed a lot, and the boys got sick of that because they were used to playing for cheers, you know, even though they were getting to back the great Bob Dylan. And so then Bob Dylan, I think, had his motorbike accident, so he was out of luck for a while, and they moved to Woodstock, and they bought this house down the bottom. You can see that picture, and it's a big pink house, and they made their first album called Big Pink, which had that song we just talked about, Take a Load Off Annie, on it.
Yeah.
And then they played at Woodstock, and they became quite famous, and they got a little bit of money, and they decided, let's go and make an album now, something we really want to make. So they went to California. They went to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And this guy they knew hired the house where Judy Garland and Sammy Davis used to own it at one point, and they just ripped the guts out of it. They didn't buy the house; they just rented it, and they put a whole studio in there, called it their clubhouse, right?
Yeah.
And the songs on this album, Tony, for the time, it's not folk, it's not country. It's very hard to put this music in a pocket. But those songs they sing about people, they sing about places and old times, and just because America was 60s was, you know, space age, and they kind of took the music back to an older time. And the song, I just love every song on this album. The one song I want to play is a song called "The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down," and I'll tell you the story about that. Levon, there you go. The drummer was from Arkansas in the deep South, and you know, we're in the 60s. We've as we've covered before in the protest songs. You know, there's the human rights movement and stuff, and all the Confederate states down south that had the slaves, they were all kind of frowned upon. And Levon's family actually, his like grandparents stuff fought in the war, but they were just like the poor German guys who ended up having to fight for the Nazis, even though they were just normal guys like me and you. You know, so he wanted to write Robbie Robinson a song that showed that, you know, they weren't all bad guys down there. They didn't all have slaves. They just, you know, they were just normal guys, and they got caught up in this thing. Sometimes it was brother versus brother, because one brother lived in the Yankee states and one brother lived in the Confederate states, and they just signed up like they did in those days. And so he really studied this, the Confederacy, the war and stuff, and wrote these words. I just love it. And it's live here too, so you can see how good they are.
That song, but to hear the story about it, was
and that
fascinating.
clip, Tony, is from a film called The Last Waltz, which was actually directed by Martin Scorsese. He made a film. He makes great, as we know, films of documentaries about musicians, and that was their final. Well, it was supposed to be. I don't think it was in the end their final concert, but that was supposed to be their final concert. The band, and they got all these guys that they'd known because they were at Woodstock and all these places, and so all the special guests on there. It's an unbelievable lineup. There's Van Morrison, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, Ringo Starr, Eric Clapton.
Wow.
It just goes on and on and on. And actually that guy, Roddy Hawkins, who they first started with, he's on there as well. And the way they play their own songs, but then they get the other people up to sing their songs and they back them. And the way they back them, I mean, all those artists are so different, but these guys, I mean, they're just the ultimate band for me. It's on Stan. It's called The Last Waltz. It's such a cool music film to watch if you get a chance. You'll fall in love with it. Excellent. Okay, last one. Into Australia.
Yeah.
So this is more like your thing, Tony. So this is their first album. So you had Robbie Hurst and Jim McGeaney and stuff. They started out. They were at college, and they put an ad in the college paper. We need a singer, and fucking Garrett shows up, and all of a sudden Midnight Oil's filmed and formed, and they start doing gigs around Sydney. And so I'm going to leave this. I've got a great mate of mine who I've known since I was playing upstairs at the Exchange back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. He's
G'day.
I'll just let him tell the story.
My name's Jono. This has been filmed in a motel car park in Cairns. my good friend Tate has asked me to tell you a story about Midnight Oil and Powderworks. You know, you get the album covers, and on every album cover on the back, you know, the band thanks everybody for helping them get to where they were. Nobody knows most of the time where those people are. But I can tell you a story about one name on the back of that album cover. I grew up in Sydney, young lad, 19-year-old, got my first job in the ANZ Bank suburb of Chatswood, which is upper North Shore in Sydney. Main road was Victoria Avenue, used to run from Willoughby to Chatswood train station, and then another 300-400 metres to, I don't know why I looked that way, to Pacific Highway. And I worked, first job was ANZ Bank, 457 Victoria Avenue, Chatswood. So if you walk out of the branch and you look across the road, there's the Chatswood railway station, and on the right hand side there's a pathway that you could go walk down to the rest of the Chatswood suburb, underpass and so on. But halfway up the walkway, you turn right, there's a laneway, and you know those suburban laneways where you've got garages backing onto it, fences and all that sort of stuff. And probably if you turn up that laneway, maybe 6 or 7 garage on the left, that's where Midnight Oil practiced. And when they practiced and you were within 200-300 metres of their garage, you could absolutely hear it. And they used to bank at 457 ANZ Bank, Victoria Avenue, Chatswood. And there was another young lad that used to work with me, also Johnny, you know, 2 young Johnnies, bank tellers. At that time there were no, it was all passbook, cash, 1 and 2 cent coins, $1 and $2 notes, you know, there was no ATM machines or anything like that. And I clearly remember probably every Monday when, sorry, someone else is just checking in now, he's nearly gone. Every Monday morning, Robbie Hurst from Midnight Oil used to come in with the manager at the time. I'm pretty sure his name's Tim. I could be wrong, but I think it is. He used to come in and, you know, deposit their money into their little, passbook from the door takings from all the venues that they played over the weekend. And I remember at that time too, around Sydney, was all the great bands, Oil, Chisel, Angels, In Excess, AC/DC, Dragon, Australian Crawl. They were all pub bands, and they used to progress to some of the bigger venues. And the biggest venues, like bigger crowds at that time, probably Manly Vale, Bryant's Hotel at Manly Vale, there would have been Parramatta Leagues Club, Castle Hill RSL, and probably the most popular of all would have been Bondi Lifesaver. And again, at that time, there was no social media, there were no mobile phones, so it was all word of mouth. And the more bands played in pubs, the more popular they got, and they started playing bigger venues. So, because the bank with us, I remember one time our bank manager walked into the branch and he said to me and Johnny, he said, Midnight Oil, they're a good band. Have you heard of Midnight Oil? I said, yeah, we've seen them around a place, they're really popular, they're a really, really good band. So we didn't know at that time that they actually asked for a loan, I don't know how much for, from the bank manager. And on that brilliant financial advice from the 2 Johnny bank tellers, he gave them the loan. And the story goes that down the track, he got in trouble from the head office. You know, financial shit, no security and all that sort of stuff. But over the years it goes now, it shows that that was repaid 1,000 times over, considering the success and fame and fortune that Midnight Oil had worldwide after that. So if you look in the back of that album cover, you will see all the thank yous, and I can tell you now that the wonderful bank manager that we were working for that gave the loan to Midnight Oil, his name is Mr Willis, and there is on the back of that album cover a thank you to Mr Willis. So that's the story behind that name. At least you know that now. Thank you very much for listening.
And so the reason they wanted the loan was to make that album.
Wow.
So
So let's listen to him.
I
This is
love
very
this too. This
early
is pumping, isn't it?
Midnight Oil.
Woo!
Midnight Oil. What a story. What a story. Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Willis. Yeah, because ultimately Midnight Oil may not have existed if that
never
album
know.
hadn't have come out.
Never know, mate.
You never know. Braggy, thank you for your work tonight. That was
Thank you
excellent.
for
I hope the
letting me
audience
entertain myself.
enjoyed that.
In lockdown, Tony. I really appreciate it. I do.
And we have been going. You asked for a time check. We've been
Perfect.
going for just
Timed
on
it.
an hour. So with that, I think we'll sign off. I don't have a 7-inch
I didn't bring one
single
either, but we had
because
all
I
those
thought
12 inches, so
yeah. So I thought after 5 albums, people might be
Fair enough.
vinyled out. But next week we're speaking with Amanda Turner. Is the
Okay,
lady's
can't
name
wait.
from Adelaide? Female singer with
You
a
gonna
message.
send me her songs?
Mental health. Yes, I will. Mental health and bullying. So I'm really looking forward to speaking about that with her, because you've got a lot of people with a purpose and people that are out there just trying to make a positive difference to the world. I think that's a really good
thanks,
one.
mate.
It's been awesome having you
Thanks.
back, Braggy. It was a
Sorry,
little bit
and
lonely last
thanks
week,
for doing the
so-
solo thing, mate. You did the hard yards. Okay?
No worries. Next week, Amanda Turner. Thanks for tuning in. In the words of Jagger and Richards, it's only rock and roll, but I like it. We'll see you all again
See you, mate.
next week. See you guys.
Conquista tutto. L'amore conquista tutto.